All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to another Tech PD. Today, we're going to talk about passwords. We're talking about security a little bit. I've been following the news. I don't know if you've been following the news, but there's been almost, it seems like weekly or maybe monthly, there's a big, revelation of a hack or something that somebody's come out with that they've uncovered. And so we're going to talk a little bit about good security and good password hygiene. With that, let's do a tab here. All right, passwords. What makes a good password? Having multiple passwords as we do, it's kind of one of the banes of modern existence, is we have about 100 of them, right? And so what we're going to talk about today is kind of good strategies on having a good one. This is something that I have gone over with students before. I think we started like in 5th and 6th grade and maybe even 7th grade, where we go through the process of setting up accounts and doing avatars and choosing good passwords and that kind of thing. And it is one of those things that, it's like good practices, right? The best way to do it is to just have done it. So if we can get our kids in the habit of setting good passwords, we're more and more reliant now on things like, face scans or maybe our fingerprints or thumbprints, that kind of stuff. But there is still a lot of services we're doing that require good passwords. So let's just talk about that and go through that process. A couple of years ago, I may remember there was a big hack called the Equifax breach. So if you don't know what Equifax is, it is one of the 2-3 major companies around the world, or certainly in the United States, that keeps track of your credit score. So if you go for a loan for a house or for a car or whatever it is, or to a bank, this is one of the companies that has all that information that they access to, and they go find your score. This is one of the few companies that has that. Very, very important and very crucial information and very sensitive information. And so they got hacked. Now, sometimes when we think of hacks, especially with that terminology, we're thinking of terms of some guy in a dark closet somewhere, with green lettering, kind of the Matrix style going across, and really kind of nose down. Typically, it's not that. Typically, it is actually a social engineering hack, and what that means is they email somebody in the business or in the company and says, hey, I'm seeking for information. I just got an email from Bob and he told me to email you or whatever. One of the reasons why they do that is because it's easier to convince somebody to give them their password than to try to actually hack it. So in that system, we as the users typically are kind of the weakest link. And so there are, again, some best practices that we can do as a system, as educators, and help our own students and parents, hopefully make it a little bit safer. For example, one thing that I see a lot from my own as a parent, I get emails, from our teachers, my boys' teachers, that kind of thing, and a lot of people will put email addresses with everybody on it. They'll have it right there. So we all know what CC means in an email address. We see carbon copy. Well, usually right below that, you'll see BCC, and that's blind carbon copy. And what that means is that everyone else on the list can't see each other's email address. And why is that so important? Now, it's not a situation where, who cares if they see each other's email, no big deal. But why that's so important from a security way is those lists, if one person on that list gets compromised, meaning their account gets hacked or gets broken into or whatever, they will search for relationships. That's really what it comes down to, is you will unlikely, if you get an email from some Nigerian prince that says, hey, I want to give you $1 zillion, you're like, oh, I don't know this guy. I'm going to ignore that email. I'm not going to click anything it has there. But if you get an email from, say, Kern Kelly or Mr. Hammer or something like that, and it says, hey, can you please click this link? I need you to check something out. You more likely to click on it because they say, oh, well, that's from Kern's email address. It must be okay. Well, that's how they get those email addresses. And so it's one of those things that, like, little things like this, again, it's not the end of the world, but it's one of those things that we try to, be as safe as possible, right? Like, all these little things add up. Another hack that just happened recently, and I don't know if you noticed this in the news last month or so or 2 ago, whatever, SolarWinds. Now, SolarWinds is this company that most, if not all, of the governmental agencies would use to, basically it's a data collection company, and they do different things, database type software stuff. But if you follow the track down, they got hacked as well. And what it came down to was kind of down the chain, you had the CEO, and they push it down to one of their tech people, and they push it down eventually to an intern. And the password they were using for their GitHub, which is a place where they store code and that kind of thing, was You guessed it, SolarWinds123. Right? So basically about as bad as it could possibly be. And so on one hand, you could blame the intern. That's obviously a horrible password. But at the same time, the systems themselves that allow that. That's why when you go on to certain websites and you say, oh, you have to have at least 8 characters and you have to have a number and you have to have a symbol, all that crazy stuff. That's not by accident. That's to hopefully force a better password. One of the things that can happen and does happen, it's called a brute force attack. And what that means is basically you copy and paste every word or every possible combination of letters and numbers to try to guess somebody's password, right? If you're using dictionary found words, then it's more easy to do that because you can, like basically copy and paste a dictionary from a computer, every single word and try a combination doesn't take long. But the longer your password is, the more numbers and weird letters, that kind of stuff it has, the less likely that's to happen. With security like this, right, it's always a balance between security and convenience. If you think about the most secure location, as far as physically, is probably a prison. Like it's really hard to get in and out of there. Cool, not very convenient and not very fun place to be, right? Like I'm not interested in being in a prison. Yes, it's more secure, but it's not very convenient, right, to get in and out of there or to be there. So we kind of have a balance. I might have, 16-digit password, two-factor authentication, biometric scan, all this cool stuff. That's extremely inconvenient, right? So it's less likely that I'm actually going to do that. If you make security so hard to use, then we actually find that it's less secure because people just don't do it. And then, of course, if the convenience is higher, password is 12345 or SolarWinds123, super convenient, but not secure at all, right? So we have to kind of find that balance as much as possible. One thing that you'll see, or you may have heard of before, I just want to explain what it is a little bit, and why you may or may not want to use this. So this is called two-factor authentication. And what that means is a password is something you know. I know in my head, here's my password. Here's the word or phrase or numbers or whatever combination that I know. Two-factor means it's something you know and something you have. So if, for example, if I turn this on, if there are apps you can use with your phone so that I actually have to have this physical device, and what will happen is if I try to sign in, a little number will pop up. Oh, the number is 01234 or whatever, some combination. And I would have to type that in. That means that I would have to know my password and have this device to get into my account. Obviously, that's more secure and also less convenient, right? Because I have to have my phone with me. But depending on what your needs are, if you're doing like maybe your bank account or something that's you're really concerned about security, it may be worth the time and energy to do that. And that's one thing we're not going to talk about too much today on how to do that. We could theoretically turn this on for our district, and I know other districts I've talked to that they did that for their staff, but we need a lot of training to do that because we want, you'd have to have your phone with you or a device to be able to use it. The benefit of that is if somebody did get your password, let's say they hacked it and they found it somewhere or social engineered it, they emailed you and convinced you to give it to them, whatever, they still couldn't get in because they would have to have your physical device at the same time. It doesn't have to be a phone. They actually have these they look like thumb drives, they're UB keys. They're about this big and they have a little code on it. They work basically the same way. And now the new thing, or the relatively new thing, is, again, if you have a newer phones that do face recognition, or they might have a fingerprint reader or a thumbprint reader, it's not only what you know or what you have, but who you are. So it actually looks at your fingerprint and uses that as a way to access your information. The drawback with that scenario, using your fingerprint or whatever, is if that information does get hacked. Look, passwords can be changed, right? Or a code on a device can be changed. But if your face structure or your fingerprint or whatever that stuff does get compromised, you can't change it, right? So that's an issue in itself. So just want to everybody know about what two-factor is. If you can choose to use this and if you're willing to take on that inconvenience, because it is slightly less convenient, I would highly recommend it because it's a great, very, very secure way to do it. Because we know that they don't make it easy, right? We have our passwords, we get on there, and they ask us to create a password, so we put a password in, cabbage, cool, we're good. Sorry, that password must contain more than 8 characters. Okay, so I'll just make it boiled cabbage, that's good. Sorry, the password must contain 1 numerical character. Okay, 1 boiled cabbage, we're good, right? Sorry, the password must contain at least 1 uppercase character. Okay, 1 freaking boiled cabbage, right? At some point, you're like, okay, enough, whatever. And you realize, nope, that password's already in use. Okay, so what we want to do is develop a structure that we can have a very secure password that we can use basically everywhere, and not the same. That's a huge no-no as well. If you use the same password everywhere, what happens is if one place gets compromised, then that obviously is compromised everywhere. That's typically what happens is if you use the same password, I use it for my bank account and my Google account, and I also use this for this website. I'm going to order something just one time from this kind of weird website. I don't know, but it's okay. I'll use my password. Well, if that password gets compromised there, they then use it everywhere else. And so I'm going to show you a way to kind of address that too. So one of the standard things is 8 characters, right? Most places require at least 8 characters. Sometimes they require less and sometimes they require more, but I would say at least 8. So if you just make it by default that your passwords have no less than 8 characters, then you know you're going to be covered. You don't have to have a different password on one website than another one because this one has 6 and this one has 10 and this one has 8 or whatever. So I'd start there, at least 8 characters. Upper and lowercase, again, goes without saying. If you think about it, if there are 26 letters in the alphabet, well, if you have 26 uppercase and now 26 lowercase, you immediately just doubled your options as far as what you're going to use. Numbers, same thing. I'm finding more websites, not all of them yet, but more websites or services are require you to have more than one number. So it's not just one number, you have to have 2. So I'm now in the habit of using 2 numbers, and I'll show you how I do that as well, rather than just one. And a symbol. So it's worth noting, you can't use spaces, you can't use slashes, you can't use parentheses. So those are symbols that are just reserved because they use them for other things. But pretty much anything on the number row. So if you hold shift down, an exclamation point, @ sign, hashtag, whatever, any of that kind of stuff you can use, and that's what I recommend. Now, you hear things like, well, you just replace your O's with zeros and your S's with number signs and that kind of stuff, which I'll show you about that as well. Just realize all those kind of tricks and whatever, if you know that, if you think of that, so do the hackers, right? Like it's not a big secret. So you want to be as diverse as possible. And also different on every site. Again, if you use the same password, that's problematic. So I'll show you a couple tricks on how to deal with that. My recommendation to not have a dictionary word or your pet's name or maybe your kid's name or something that's pretty, a real word is find a phrase that you like. I just chose a lyric, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, right? So just something that it's easy to remember, something that's easy to I don't have to really think about it. Or you can do a song lyric, you could do a phrase, you could do a saying, whatever, something like this. And then if you just take the first letter of every a word, something like that, you have something you can easily remember. Like if I'm sitting down to do my password, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, or whatever version of that it is, I can remember the first letter of each of those very easily because I'm not trying to remember this weird word, SWOTRBBF, or something like that. So that's just an easy way to have a very unique code, or whatever you call it, but it's something that you would only know. Now, I know some of the more even harder ways to do this. I know one gentleman, he actually uses a book and he remembers the just a random book he has and the page and the line number. So he'll use a totally random phrase basically. So it's not even a song. So it's even more random than that. But again, that's up to you as how far you want to go with that. So let's take these letters SWOTRBBF. And we're going to we're going to spice them up a little bit. We're going to add some other features to it. So first thing, we'll change that O to a 0. That's pretty easy. And again, it's not like it's a hacker thing, but that just makes it one less, one makes it a little bit harder to use for next time. We'll also change the S into a $. Again, that's an easy one to remember. So $, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Also lowercase, right? So we're going to change those B's. And again, you could choose something else if it made sense. Maybe just the first letter is uppercase and everything else is lowercase. I just did the B's because I can remember those. Okay, lowercase BB, no problem. And then we'll bring that together. So now here's my crazy password, $, capital W, 0, capital T, capital R, lowercase b, F. If you ask me to memorize that off the, by myself, forget it. But if I remember somewhere over the rainbow, BB flies, right? That's easier to remember and I can use that. And that's a super secure password. The last piece is, if I want to use a similar password on different sites, what I use is I actually have I pick a number. So let's say the 3rd letter in or the 5th letter in or the whatever on each site, and I add that letter to the end of it. So for example, let's say I want to do Google. So I'm just going to do the fourth letter in, so G-O-G, G-O-O-G, and I'm just going to throw a capital G at the end of it. So this is my password for my Google stuff, or my Gmail, say, or maybe for Amazon or Facebook or whatever, whatever you pick. That way it's always different on every single site. You could actually add more letters in one, like that'd be even more secure, which wouldn't be a bad thing to do. But that way you don't have to memorize a single different password for every place you go. You just have your main, really good, really weird, really modified password. But each website you go to, you can just add a little piece to it. So oh yeah, I'm on the Amazon. I'm going to do the third letter in. It's an A. There we go. I'm good to go. And that just makes it a little bit easier too. So something like this, if I showed you this to start with, to memorize, like, oh, that's crazy. But being able to kind of have a phrase you can use, or have a lyric, and then add a couple little things to it. And then next time, eventually, as you just keep adding on, when you change passwords, the best scenario is actually just to add them together. So let's say I have this as a crazy long password, and after a few months or maybe a year, I want a totally new one, I want to change it. Well, if I add that new crazy one that I'm going to come up with and add it on top of it, again, this has been easy for me to remember because I've been doing it for a while. I can just add to it. Now let's say a crazy secure password. There's actually a website, and I didn't realize I had it here. How secure is my password.net. And this is just a fun site. I actually have the kids go here when we start talking about this. So if I put in the word cat, say, this will take nanoseconds for it to be cracked, right? So this gives you some tips. So let's try that phrase we just did. Let's see, $, somewhere over the rainbow, BB fly a. So this is still not great. It says the computer about 3 weeks. So I'm going to add a number, exclamation point at the end, and then maybe another number there. So you can put something else in there. So now we're talking 400 years, not super hard to remember. What the kids will like to do, just so you know, if you share this one, is they'll do this. Cool, this is a zillion, trillion, whatever that word is. I don't even know how many years that is. Years, nobody will ever crack that. Now we'll try to repeat it. Of course you can't, because they just hit a bunch of letters. So, but this is just kind of a fun way to see how good or bad or whatever your password is, to see how many seconds it would take to crack it. All right. Realize, and this is an actual picture from an actual teacher years ago that had a password written right up on their table. And don't worry, it's encrypted, it's flipped over. The issue there is if your password is compromised, it doesn't just affect you, right? It doesn't just get your stuff. That means that student can go to all the things that you have access to as an educator, and that could be very problematic. That's why we do as much as we do with security, and we really try to make sure that we have things lined up as it should be. So make sure that you're not giving students passwords to your account and letting them see that kind of stuff or whatever. We haven't had a really lot of breaks or that we know of. We haven't a lot of breaches, which is great. But if you had a student that's really wanted to try to break in, if they have a teacher's password, and even at the younger grades or whatever, then they could theoretically use that to get into more, right? Like that's kind of the door in. And the other thing, as I mentioned too, is social. So really, we'll never be asking for your password as far as, from the tech staff. We might reset it for you and have you reset on your end, but we wouldn't need you to email us. Nor would your bank. If you ever get an email, right, from your bank saying, oh, you need to send your password. I've seen some really authentic looking information before that looks like a real email from like a bank or from an institution, whatever, but it's not, right? It's not actually from the real thing. And that's, of course, how they do it, and it's why they do it. I don't know if I'm not gonna worry about this one right here. This is a video that my son, it'll be on the slideshow if you guys want to see it, that did a couple of years ago about email safety, not giving out your password. A little Lego video, if you want to check that out. It's kind of fun. Finally, this is a great site. If you do want to see, okay, has my email address been, they call it pwned, which is kind of a shorthand gamer speak for like, has somebody taken it? Now, as I mentioned, if our email addresses were in Equifax, that company, which most of them were, there was 100 million or something crazy amount of US citizens that had their email addresses in there. If they get pwned, if they get used, and it doesn't mean that they can necessarily break into it, it means they can try that email address to break into another service. Let's say, for example, your Gmail account or something like that. Well, that's where they'll take those email addresses, they'll take those passwords if it's the same password we use other places, and they'll try to match them up. And that's really how they get into it. And again, you might say, well, why would they want to do that? Who cares? Well, if they can convince somebody, and as they do, convince somebody to use their email addresses, to like start that process of social engineering to try to get credit card numbers and all that kind of stuff and set up accounts, it's a business. There's a reason why there is money there, or else I wouldn't bother doing it, right? So this is a cool site here. Have I been pwned? If you put your email address in here, let's put a fake one in for right now. And if you have, you'll see, so this address, whatever this is, it will tell you, oh no, and it'll show you which places. So here's Adobe, here's different ones, whatever. It will show you the actual sites that it has been, linked to. And again, it doesn't mean that it's all over, the world's over. You can go in and you can see what you can do about it right here. You can actually see the data breaches, and it'll show you what to do about that. So hopefully that gives you guys some ideas for some better password security and kind of hygiene. If you guys have any questions, I don't see any in the chat here, so that's probably wrap it up for the day, but feel free to reach out as always. Next week, I am going to have some students joining us. Again, we're going to go back to that a little bit more. Now that we have kids coming 4 days a week at the high school, I'm super excited about that. I hope that works out very well for everybody. And so we're going to do some more student presentations kind of built into our Wednesday Tech PD. If there's anything specific that you would like to cover, shoot me an email or just let us know, and we will certainly do that. And if there's anything that you want to highlight from your students, one of the things that we do is when I have kids join, is basically they're talking about most of the tools they're using in the projects that they're doing. So if you have something that you think that your students would be interested in sharing for staff, this is a great opportunity because you have a very receptive audience that they kind of want those kids to succeed, and it's a great way for the kids to get those presentation skills, especially doing it in this manner. So with that, thank you guys all very much. Have a terrific Wednesday, rest of the day, and a weekend, and we will see you all next week.